What if someone could predict the exact year of Jesus Christ's death? 600 years before it happened. Not a guess, not a coincidence, but a calculation so precise, so mathematically perfect, that when you trace the timeline, it lands on the very year the Messiah walked to the cross. His name was Daniel, a young man taken captive to Babylon, a stranger in a foreign land. He had no army, no throne, no power. But God gave him something far greater, the ability to see the future. He saw empires rise and fall before they were even born. He saw beasts and kings, thrones of fire, and the Ancient of Days. He saw a timeline that stretched across centuries, leading to one moment, one person, one sacrifice that would change everything. Tonight, as the world grows quiet and the stars take their place in the heavens, let the visions of Daniel unfold before you. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let this ancient story carry you into rest. For what Daniel saw was not just prophecy. It was the unfolding of God's perfect plan, written before time began. Chapter 1. Daniel in Babylon, the exile begins. In the year 605 before Christ, the world as the people of Judah knew it came to an end. The armies of Babylon swept across the land like a storm. King Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of the greatest empire on earth, stood at the gates of Jerusalem. His soldiers wore armor that gleamed like bronze in the sun. His chariots thundered across the hills, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of a kingdom that had never known defeat. Jerusalem trembled. The elders gathered in the temple, praying, weeping, asking God why this was happening. But the prophets had already spoken. Jeremiah had warned them for years. If you do not turn back to the Lord, he will give this city into the hands of the king of Babylon. They had not listened. And so, on that day, the gates were opened, not by force, but by surrender. The king of Judah, Jehoiakim, bowed before Nebuchadnezzar and handed over the treasures of the temple. Gold, silver, sacred vessels that had been used in the worship of the Most High God. All of it was carried away to Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar did not stop there. He also took people, not soldiers, not warriors, but the brightest, the strongest, the most noble young men of Judah, boys who had grown up in the shadow of the temple, who had been taught the law of Moses, who carried the hope of their nation in their hearts. Among them was a boy named Daniel. He was young, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, handsome, intelligent, from a family of royalty, the kind of boy who, in another time, might have become a priest, a scholar, a leader of his people. But now, his hands were bound, his feet were on a road that led far from home, and his future was no longer his own. The journey to Babylon was long, over 800 miles on foot, through deserts and mountains, across rivers and plains. Daniel and the other captives walked in chains, their eyes filled with dust and tears. At night, they sat beneath foreign stars, speaking in whispers about the city they had left behind. "Do you think we will ever see Jerusalem again?" one boy asked. Daniel looked up at the sky. The same stars that hung over Babylon also hung over Judah. The same God who had made the heavens still saw them, even here. "I don't know," Daniel said quietly. "But I know this, the Lord has not forgotten us." When they finally arrived in Babylon, the city took their breath away. It was nothing like Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a city of stone and prayer, of narrow streets and the scent of incense rising from the temple. But Babylon was a city of gold and glory. The walls were so thick that chariots could race along the top of them. The Ishtar Gate rose high into the sky, covered in blue tiles that shimmered like the surface of a calm sea. Lions and dragons were carved into the walls, their eyes gleaming in the sunlight. Gardens hung from terraces, green and lush, as if the earth itself had been lifted into the air. And at the center of it all stood the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar, vast and magnificent, a monument to the power of man. But for all its beauty, Babylon was a city of idols. On every corner there were statues of gods made by human hands. Marduk, the chief god of Babylon; Ishtar, goddess of war and love; Nabu, Shamash, sin. The people bowed before them, offered sacrifices to them, sang songs in their honor. And the air, thick with incense and the smoke of burnt offerings, carried the scent of 1,000 prayers to gods who could not hear. Daniel stood in the courtyard of the palace, his heart heavy. This was not his home. These were not his people. And these gods, they were not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The chief official of the king, a man named Ashpenaz, walked among the captives, studying them carefully. He had been given orders. Select the best of the young men from Judah. Train them in the language and literature of Babylon. Feed them from the king's own table. Dress them in fine robes. And in 3 years, present them to Nebuchadnezzar, so they might serve in his court. Ashpenaz stopped in front of Daniel. He looked him over, noting the strength in his frame, the clarity in his eyes, the quiet dignity in the way he stood. "This one," Ashpenaz said, "he will do well." Daniel and 3 of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were chosen. They were given new names, names that honored the gods of Babylon. Daniel became Belteshazzar, which means Bel protects his life. Hananiah became Shadrach. Mishael became Meshach. Azariah became Abednego. It was meant to erase who they were, to make them forget the God they had worshipped all their lives, to turn them into Babylonians. But Daniel made a decision in his heart, a quiet, private decision that no one else could see. He would serve the king of Babylon with all the skill and wisdom God gave him. But he would not abandon the God of Israel. He would not defile himself, and he would not bow. The first test came quickly. The king's servants brought food to the young men, rich food from Nebuchadnezzar's own table, meat that had been sacrificed to idols, wine poured out in honor of Marduk. It was the finest food in all the world, food that most people would never taste in their entire lives. But Daniel knew the law of Moses. He knew that to eat this food would be to participate in the worship of false gods. And so, with great respect, he approached the guard who had been assigned to watch over them. "Please," Daniel said, "do not make us eat the king's food. Give us only vegetables and water. Test us for 10 days. If we do not look as healthy as the other young men, then you may do with us as you wish." The guard hesitated. If the boys grew weak, if their faces became pale, if they looked sickly, Ashpenaz would have his head. But there was something in Daniel's voice, something in his eyes, that made the guard trust him. 10 days, the guard said. No more. For 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate only vegetables and drank only water. The other young men feasted on the king's meat and wine, their plates piled high, their cups overflowing. But Daniel's plate was simple: lentils, cucumbers, bread, and water from the well. At the end of 10 days, the guard returned. He looked at Daniel and his friends, then at the others, and his eyes widened in disbelief. Daniel and his friends looked healthier, stronger. Their skin glowed. Their eyes were clear. They stood taller, moved with more energy, spoke with more clarity than any of the others. The guard shook his head in wonder. From that day on, he let them eat as they wished. But it was not the vegetables that made them strong. It was God, the same God who had fed Elijah by the brook, who had multiplied the widow's oil, who had rained manna from heaven in the wilderness. He was with Daniel, and he was preparing him for something far greater than anyone in Babylon could imagine. 3 years passed. Daniel and his friends studied the language of the Chaldeans, the literature of Babylon, the movements of the stars, the interpretation of dreams. They learned faster than anyone else. They remembered everything. They understood not just the words, but the meaning behind them. And when the time came for them to stand before King Nebuchadnezzar, the king questioned them personally. He asked them about wisdom, about understanding, about matters of judgment and insight. And the Bible records this. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. 10 times better, not a little better, not slightly more knowledgeable. 10 times, because the wisdom they carried did not come from books. It came from the Spirit of the living God. But even as Daniel settled into life in Babylon, even as he learned their language and served their king, his heart remained in Jerusalem. Every evening he would open the window of his room, face toward the west, toward the city of his fathers, and pray. 3 times a day, every day, without fail. He prayed for his people. He prayed for the temple. He prayed that God would not forget the covenant he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he prayed for something else, something he could not yet name, that one day the Lord would send the promised one, the Messiah, to restore all that had been lost. He did not know, in those early years, that God was about to show him the answer. Not in words, not in promises, but in visions, visions of empires, visions of beasts, visions of thrones and fire, and a timeline so precise, so perfect, that it would reveal the exact moment the Messiah would come. Years later, in the reign of another king, in the dead of night, Daniel would stand before the throne of Babylon once more. But this time, he would not be a student. He would be a prophet, and the words he would speak would echo across centuries, reaching forward in time to the very moment when the Son of God would walk the earth. But for now, Daniel was just a young man in a foreign land, a captive, a servant, a dreamer, waiting, watching, praying. And the God who had called him, the God who had never left him, was preparing to reveal the future of the world. Chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar's Dream. The Statue of 4 Kingdoms. Years passed in Babylon. Daniel grew from a young captive into a trusted servant of the king. He had proven himself wise, faithful, and discerning, but he had not yet been tested in the way that would change his life forever. One night, King Nebuchadnezzar could not sleep. He tossed and turned on his royal bed, his mind troubled by something he could not name. The palace was silent. The guards stood watch in the hallways. The city of Babylon slept beneath the stars. But the king's eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling, his heart heavy with a strange unease. And then, in the depth of the night, he dreamed. It was not an ordinary dream. It was vivid, overwhelming, filled with images so powerful that when he woke, his whole body was trembling. He sat up in bed, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew, somehow, that this dream was important, that it meant something, that it carried a message from the realm beyond the visible world. But when he tried to remember it, the images slipped away like water through his fingers. He could feel the weight of it, the urgency of it, but he could not see it anymore. The dream was gone. Nebuchadnezzar called for his servants. "Bring me the wise men," he commanded. "Bring me the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans. Bring them all." No. Within the hour, the throne room was filled. Men in long robes, their faces marked with the symbols of their craft, stood before the king. They bowed low, confident in their abilities. For years, they had served Nebuchadnezzar, interpreting omens, reading the stars, offering counsel. They believed there was nothing they could not do. The king looked at them with cold, hard eyes. "I have had a dream," he said, "and my spirit is troubled. I want to know what it means." The wise men nodded. "O king, live forever," they said in unison. "Tell us the dream, and we will give you the interpretation." But Nebuchadnezzar shook his head. "No," he said, "I have forgotten the dream. You must tell me both the dream and its meaning. If you can do this, I will give you gifts, rewards, and great honor. But if you cannot—" He paused, letting the silence hang in the air like a blade. "I will have you torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into piles of rubble." The room went deathly silent. The wise men looked at each other in shock. "O king," one of them stammered, "there is no one on earth who can do what you ask. No king, however great, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter. What you ask is impossible. Only the gods can reveal it, and they do not dwell among mortals." Nebuchadnezzar's face turned red with fury. He stood from his throne, his voice like thunder. "If you cannot tell me the dream, then you are all frauds. You have been lying to me all these years, pretending to have wisdom you do not possess. I will not be deceived any longer." He turned to his captain of the guard. "Execute them," he said. "All the wise men of Babylon." The decree went out immediately. Soldiers moved through the city, going from house to house, rounding up every magician, every sorcerer, every man who had claimed to possess secret knowledge. And because Daniel and his friends had been enrolled among the wise men of Babylon, they too were marked for death. Daniel was at home when the soldiers came to his door. The captain of the guard, a man named Arioch, stood at the threshold, his face grim. "I am sorry, Daniel," Arioch said quietly. "The king has given the order. All the wise men must be executed." Daniel did not panic. He did not plead. He simply looked at Arioch and asked, "Why has the king issued such a harsh decree?" Arioch explained everything: the dream, the king's demand, the failure of the wise men. Daniel listened carefully. Then he said, "Give me time. I will go to the king and ask for more time, and I will tell him the dream and its meaning." Arioch hesitated. He liked Daniel. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the other so-called wise men. He nodded. "I will speak to the king. But hurry." Daniel went home and immediately gathered his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He told them everything, and then he said, "We must pray. Only the God of heaven can reveal this mystery. If we do not receive an answer, we will all face the king's judgment tomorrow." That night, the 4 young men knelt together in Daniel's room. They did not pray to Marduk or Ishtar or any of the gods of Babylon. They prayed to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had parted the Red Sea, the God who had given wisdom to Solomon, the God who sees all things, knows all things, and holds the future in his hands. "Lord," Daniel prayed, "you are the revealer of mysteries. You know what is hidden in darkness, and light dwells with you. Please, show me the king's dream, not for my sake, but so that your name may be glorified in this place." They prayed through the night. And as the first light of dawn touched the sky, Daniel fell into a deep sleep. And in that sleep, God gave him the vision. He saw everything. The dream Nebuchadnezzar had seen in perfect clarity, as if he himself had been standing in the king's chamber. And more than that, he saw the meaning, every detail, every symbol, every kingdom, every century, the whole timeline of human history laid out before him like a scroll. When Daniel woke, his heart was pounding. He fell to his knees and worshipped. "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever," he whispered. "Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things." Daniel went immediately to Arioch. "Do not execute the wise men," he said. "Take me to the king. I will tell him the dream." Arioch brought Daniel before Nebuchadnezzar. The king looked at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel stood tall. He did not boast. He did not take credit. He simply said, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come." The king leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Daniel. Daniel continued, "As you were lying on your bed, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation." Then Daniel began to describe the dream. "You looked, O king, and there before you stood a great statue. It was enormous, dazzling in appearance, and terrifying to behold. The head of the statue was made of pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly baked clay." Nebuchadnezzar's eyes widened. That was it. That was exactly what he had seen. Daniel went on. "While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth." The king sat in stunned silence. Every word Daniel spoke matched the images that had filled his mind that night. "This was the dream," Daniel said. "Now I will tell you what it means." He took a breath, and then, with the authority of one who speaks not his own words but the words of God, he began to interpret. "You, O king, are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion, power, might, and glory. He has placed in your hands the children of men, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold." Nebuchadnezzar's chest swelled with pride. He was the head of gold, the greatest king on earth. But Daniel was not finished. "After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. It will be like the chest and arms of silver. This kingdom will be strong, but not as glorious as Babylon. It will conquer, but it will lack the unity and splendor of your reign." Daniel paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Then a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. It will be vast, spreading farther than any kingdom before it. Its armies will move like the wind, swift and unstoppable. But it, too, will pass away. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. Iron breaks and smashes everything. And just as iron breaks things to pieces, so this kingdom will crush and break all the others. But you also saw that the feet and toes were partly baked clay and partly iron. This means the kingdom will be divided. It will have some of the strength of iron, but it will also be brittle, like clay. Just as iron and clay do not mix, so the people of this kingdom will not remain united." Nebuchadnezzar leaned back on his throne, his mind racing. 4 kingdoms, 4 empires. His own was the first. But what would come after? Daniel's voice grew softer, but more powerful. "In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will never be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever." This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the statue and broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. Daniel looked directly into the king's eyes. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. For a long moment, the king said nothing. Then, slowly, he rose from his throne. And to the shock of everyone in the room, King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man on earth, fell to his knees before Daniel. "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings," Nebuchadnezzar said, his voice trembling. "He is a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." The king honored Daniel greatly. He gave him gifts, made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and placed him in charge of all the wise men. At Daniel's request, the king also appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to high positions. But Daniel did not forget what he had seen. The statue, the 4 kingdoms, the rock cut without hands. He knew what it meant. God had just revealed the entire timeline of human history. 4 great empires would rise and fall. And at the end, a 5th kingdom, not built by human hands, would come. A kingdom that would never end. The head of gold was Babylon. The chest and arms of silver would be the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of bronze would be Greece under Alexander the Great. The legs of iron would be Rome, the most powerful and brutal empire the world would ever see. And the feet of iron and clay would be the divided kingdoms that followed. And the rock was the kingdom of God, the Messiah. The one who would come not to build an empire with swords and chariots, but to establish a reign of righteousness that would fill the whole earth. Daniel had seen the future, and though he did not yet know the details, though he did not yet know the exact moment when the rock would strike, he knew one thing for certain: God's kingdom was coming. And nothing, not Babylon, not Persia, not Greece, not Rome, nothing on earth or in heaven could stop it. Chapter 3. The Fiery Furnace, Faith Under Fire. Years passed. Nebuchadnezzar remained king, his power unshaken, his glory unmatched. But something had changed in him. Perhaps it was the dream. Perhaps it was the image of that statue, with its head of gold. Perhaps it was pride. Whatever the reason, one day the king made a decree that would test the faith of Daniel's friends in a way they had never been tested before. On the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the construction of an enormous statue. It was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, covered entirely in gold. It gleamed in the sunlight, visible for miles in every direction. And it was not a statue of a god. It was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar himself. When the statue was finished, the king sent word throughout the empire. Every official, every governor, every leader from every province was commanded to come to the plain of Dura for the dedication ceremony. On the appointed day, thousands gathered. The plain was filled with people as far as the eye could see. Soldiers stood at attention. Musicians held their instruments, waiting for the signal. And at the center of it all, towering above them, stood the golden image. A herald stepped forward and shouted in a loud voice, "Peoples, nations, and men of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." A blazing furnace. The threat was clear. Obey or face the consequences. The musicians raised their instruments. The signal was given, and the sound of music filled the air. Horns blared. Flutes sung. Harps shimmered. And as the music swelled, every person on the plain of Dura fell to their knees. Thousands upon thousands, bowing in unison, their faces pressed to the ground. Every person, except 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall. Their eyes were not on the statue. Their hearts were not bowed in worship. They stood, quiet and still, as the world around them knelt. It did not take long for someone to notice. Some of the astrologers, men who had always been jealous of the favor shown to the young Jews, hurried to the king. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, live forever," they said, bowing low. "You have issued a decree that everyone must fall down and worship the image of gold. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar's face turned dark with rage. He had shown these men favor. He had trusted them. And now they dared to defy him in front of the entire empire. "Bring them to me," he commanded. The three friends were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar looked at them, his voice low and dangerous. "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image I have set up?" They did not flinch. They did not tremble. The king's voice softened, just slightly. Perhaps he did not want their blood on his hands. Perhaps he wanted to give them one more chance. "Now, when you hear the sound of the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" It was a challenge, a threat, and a question. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego looked at each other. Then they looked at the king, and they spoke, not with fear, but with a calm, unshakable certainty. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king." The king's eyes narrowed. They continued, "But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Even if he does not." Those 5 words carried the weight of eternity. They were not bargaining with God. They were not trying to manipulate him into saving them. They believed he could. But even if he chose not to, they would not bow. Nebuchadnezzar's fury exploded. "Heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual," he roared. "Tie them up and throw them in." The soldiers obeyed. They bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with ropes, fully clothed in their robes and turbans. The furnace was stoked until the flames roared like a living beast, so hot that the soldiers who threw the 3 men inside were overcome by the heat and perished instantly. The 3 friends fell into the fire. The crowd watched in horror. The king stood at the edge of the furnace, his eyes fixed on the flames. He expected to see 3 bodies consumed in seconds, reduced to ash and smoke. But then something impossible happened. Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet, his face pale. "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" he asked his advisers. "Certainly, O king," they replied. "Look," the king shouted, pointing into the furnace. "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." The crowd gasped. Inside the blazing furnace, where no human could survive, 4 figures walked calmly through the flames. The ropes that had bound the 3 friends had burned away, but their bodies, their clothes, even their hair remained untouched. And beside them walked another being, radiant and majestic, his form glowing with a light that was not of this world. It was the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, the same one who had walked with Adam in the garden, the same one who had wrestled with Jacob, the same one who would, centuries later, walk the dusty roads of Galilee. Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the furnace, as close as the heat would allow. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." The 3 men walked out of the furnace. The governors, prefects, and advisers crowded around them, staring in disbelief. The fire had not touched them. Their robes were not scorched. Their hair was not singed. They did not even smell of smoke. The king stood in silence, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Then he spoke, his voice filled with awe. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him, and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. He issued a new decree that day. No one in any nation or language may say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for no other God can save in this way. The three friends were honored and promoted, but they did not boast. They did not take credit. They simply returned to their work, their hearts full of gratitude, because they had learned something that day, something that every believer in every generation must learn. When you walk through the fire, you do not walk alone. The God who made the flames is the God who walks beside you in them. And no fire on earth, no furnace of trial, no blaze of persecution can consume those whom he has chosen to protect. And perhaps, as you face your own trials today, the pressure at work, the conflict at home, the fears that keep you awake at night, you too can remember this. You do not face them alone. The same God who stood with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stands with you now. Chapter 4. The Writing on the Wall. Judgment in the Palace. Many years passed after the miracle of the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar grew old, and eventually his time on earth came to an end. He had seen the power of the God of Israel, had acknowledged him as the Most High, but the heart of man is frail, and pride can take root even in the most fertile soil of faith. After Nebuchadnezzar, the throne of Babylon passed through several kings, and in time it came to rest in the hands of a man named Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He was young, ambitious, and unlike his grandfather, he had never witnessed the humbling power of the living God. Belshazzar ruled during a dangerous time. The empire of Babylon, once unshakable, was beginning to crack. To the east, the armies of the Medes and Persians were growing stronger. Their king, Cyrus, had already conquered nation after nation, and now his forces surrounded the great city of Babylon itself. But inside the palace walls, Belshazzar felt safe. Babylon's walls were impenetrable, rising high into the sky, thick enough that chariots could race along the top. The city had enough food and water stored to last for years. Let Cyrus camp outside the gates, Belshazzar thought. Let him wait. Babylon would never fall. And so, in defiance of the siege outside, in mockery of the enemies at his door, Belshazzar decided to throw a feast. It was not a small gathering. He invited 1,000 of his nobles, his governors, his military commanders. The great banquet hall of the palace was filled with tables overflowing with food and wine. Musicians played. Dancers moved through the crowd. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. And the wine flowed freely, cup after cup, hour after hour. Belshazzar sat at the head of the hall, his face flushed with drink, his eyes bright with arrogance. He raised his cup and shouted to his servants, "Bring me the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, my grandfather, took from the temple in Jerusalem. Let us drink from them." The servants hesitated. Those goblets were sacred. They had been used in the worship of the God of Israel, set apart for holy purposes. To drink from them in honor of Babylon's gods would be an act of deliberate desecration. But the king had given the order, and so the servants obeyed. They brought out the sacred vessels, the cups and bowls that had once sat in the temple of the Lord, where priests had offered prayers and incense before the Ark of the Covenant. They placed them on the tables, and the nobles grabbed them eagerly, laughing, filling them with wine. Belshazzar lifted one of the golden cups high into the air. "To Marduk," he shouted, "to Ishtar, to Bel, to all the gods of Babylon who have made us great." The crowd roared in approval. They drank deeply, toasting their idols of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Gods made by human hands. Gods that could neither see nor hear nor save. And in that moment, the laughter stopped. A silence fell over the hall, sudden and complete, as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Every eye turned toward the wall, where the torches flickered and the shadows danced. And then they saw it. A hand, not a whole body, not an angel, just a hand, visible from the wrist down, with fingers that moved slowly, deliberately, across the white plaster of the wall. It was not flesh. It was not spirit. It was something in between, glowing faintly, solid enough to leave marks but transparent enough to see through. And it was writing. The fingers traced letters across the wall, each stroke precise, unhurried, as if the hand belonged to someone who had all the time in the world. The sound of the writing was the only sound in the room. A soft scraping, like a pen on parchment, but louder, echoing through the silence. Belshazzar's face went white. His hands began to shake. His knees knocked together, and he gripped the arms of his throne to keep from falling. The wine cup slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, spilling red liquid across the stones like blood. The hand finished writing. 4 words. Strange words. Words in a language the king did not recognize. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. And then the hand disappeared. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The nobles stared at the wall, their faces pale, their breath shallow. The musicians stood frozen, their instruments silent. Even the servants stood motionless, their eyes wide with terror. Belshazzar found his voice. "Bring in the enchanters," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Bring the astrologers, bring the diviners. Whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be clothed in purple, given a gold chain, and made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom." The wise men of Babylon hurried into the hall. They crowded around the wall, squinting at the words, muttering to one another in low voices. They studied the letters from every angle. They consulted their scrolls, their charts, their books of ancient knowledge. But none of them could read it. None of them could tell the king what it meant. Belshazzar's terror grew. He paced back and forth, wringing his hands, his breath coming in short gasps. The nobles whispered among themselves, fear spreading through the room like a cold wind. Then the Queen Mother entered. She had heard the commotion and came to see what had happened. When she saw the king's face, pale and trembling, she spoke calmly. "O king, live forever. Do not be alarmed. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, this man was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your grandfather appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. His name is Daniel. Call for him, and he will tell you what the writing means." Belshazzar seized on the suggestion. "Bring Daniel to me at once." Daniel was no longer young. Decades had passed since he had first stood before Nebuchadnezzar and interpreted the dream of the statue. His hair was now grey, his face lined with age. But his eyes were still clear, his mind still sharp, and the Spirit of God still rested upon him. When Daniel entered the banquet hall, he looked at the king without fear. Belshazzar gestured toward the wall. "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my grandfather brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and extraordinary wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple, given a gold chain, and made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel looked at the king, then at the wall, then back at the king. He spoke slowly, his voice steady. "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." Then Daniel did something unexpected. He did not go straight to the interpretation. He reminded the king of history, of his grandfather, of the lessons Belshazzar should have learned but had ignored. "O king, the Most High God gave your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness, and glory and splendor. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and sets over them anyone he wishes. Daniel's voice grew sharper. But you, his grandson, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. The room was silent. Belshazzar's face was ashen. Daniel turned to the wall. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is what these words mean. He pointed to the first word. Men, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. He pointed to the second word. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. He pointed to the third word. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Belshazzar, true to his word, commanded that Daniel be clothed in purple and given a gold chain. He proclaimed him the third highest ruler in the kingdom, but it was an empty honor. That very night, while the feast continued, while the nobles tried to resume their drinking and laughter, something was happening outside the walls of Babylon. The armies of Cyrus the Persian had found a way into the city. They had diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed beneath the great walls, and marched through the riverbed into the heart of Babylon. The guards, distracted by the feast, did not notice until it was too late. The soldiers moved swiftly through the streets. They reached the palace. They broke through the doors. And in the early hours of the morning, as the first light of dawn touched the sky, Belshazzar's reign came to an end that very night. The empire of Babylon, the head of gold, the kingdom that had stood for generations, fell in a single night. And Daniel's words came true. Every syllable, every prophecy, every warning. The kingdom was divided. The Medes and Persians took the throne, and the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had seen in his dream moved one step closer to its end. The chest and arms of silver had arrived. Chapter 5. The Vision of Four Beasts, Empires as Monsters. Years passed once more. Babylon was no longer the center of the world. The Medo-Persian Empire now ruled, vast and powerful, stretching from India to Ethiopia. The new king, Darius the Mede, honored Daniel and placed him in a position of great authority. But Daniel was growing old. He had lived through the rise and fall of empires. He had seen kings come and go, and yet God was not finished speaking to him. One night, during the first year of Belshazzar's reign, before the writing on the wall, before the fall of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. He was not interpreting someone else's vision. This time, the vision was his own. He saw himself standing by the edge of a great sea. The water was dark, churning, whipped into a frenzy by violent winds that came from every direction. The waves rose and crashed, and the air was filled with the sound of thunder and the roar of the deep. And then, from the sea, four great beasts emerged. The first beast was like a lion, but it had the wings of an eagle. It moved with power and speed, its roar shaking the ground. Daniel watched as the wings were torn from its back, and it was lifted from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a human heart was given to it. This, Daniel understood, was Babylon. The lion, king of beasts. The eagle, king of birds. A kingdom of glory and pride. But in the end, it would be humbled, stripped of its power, and given the heart of a man. Just as Nebuchadnezzar had been humbled, driven into the wilderness, and then restored. The second beast rose from the sea like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. A voice said to it, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." Daniel knew this was the Medo-Persian Empire. The bear, strong and brutal, raised up on one side because the Persians were stronger than the Medes. The 3 ribs represented the 3 kingdoms it had devoured: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. It would conquer with relentless force, consuming nation after nation, never satisfied. The 3rd beast appeared next, and it was like a leopard. But this leopard had 4 wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. It was given authority to rule. This was Greece, the leopard, swift and deadly. The 4 wings represented the speed of Alexander the Great's conquests. In just over 10 years, he swept across the known world, from Macedonia to India, moving faster than any army in history. But the 4 heads symbolized what would happen after his passing. His empire would be divided among his 4 generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Greece would rule, but it would not remain united. And then the 4th beast emerged. And Daniel could find no animal on earth to compare it to. It was terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had large iron teeth that crushed and devoured everything in its path. What it did not eat, it trampled underfoot. It was different from all the beasts that had come before it. And it had 10 horns. This was Rome, the empire that would crush all others. The legs of iron from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Rome would conquer with a brutality the world had never seen. It would build roads and cities, bring law and order, but it would do so with the sword. It would crucify rebels, burn cities, enslave nations. And the 10 horns represented 10 kings or kingdoms that would arise from it. But as Daniel watched, something even stranger happened. While he was considering the 10 horns, another horn, a little one, came up among them. 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Daniel's heart pounded. This little horn was different. It was not just a king. It was a person of great cunning and ambition. It spoke words against the Most High, oppressed his saints, and tried to change the set times and the laws. It would rule for a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years. Many scholars believe this points to a pattern we see repeated in Scripture, a figure who rises in rebellion against God and his people. Some see this fulfilled in part by Antiochus Epiphanes, who persecuted the Jews and defiled the temple. Others believe it points forward to a future time, when another such ruler will arise at the end of the age. But then the scene changed. Daniel saw thrones set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. His hair was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire flowed from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Daniel watched as the 4th beast, with its boastful horn, met its end. Its body was destroyed and given over to the burning fire. The other beasts had their dominion taken away, but they were allowed to live for a period of time. And then Daniel saw something that made him fall to his knees. In his vision, he looked up, and there before him was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion that would not pass away, and his kingdom was one that would never be destroyed. Many scholars believe this figure represents the Messiah, fulfilled in Jesus Christ, who would later refer to himself as the Son of Man throughout the Gospels. When Jesus stood before the high priest and declared, "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven," he was echoing the very vision Daniel saw 6 centuries earlier. Daniel's mind reeled. He had seen the future. 4 empires would rise: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Each one more brutal than the last. But in the end, they would all fall. And the kingdom of God, eternal and unshakable, would fill the earth. But Daniel was troubled. The vision was overwhelming. He approached one of those standing there, an angel, and asked him the meaning of all this. The angel said, "The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever." Daniel asked specifically about the 4th beast, the one that was different from all the others, terrifying and destructive, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, and especially about the little horn that waged war against the saints and seemed to be prevailing. The angel explained, "The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints. He will try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time." Then the angel's voice grew stronger, filled with hope. "But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him." Daniel stood in silence. The vision was complete, but his heart was deeply troubled. He kept the matter to himself, turning it over in his mind again and again. He had seen the rise and fall of empires. He had seen the pride of kings and the suffering of the faithful. He had seen war, oppression, and the arrogance of those who thought they could overthrow the plans of God. But he had also seen something else. He had seen the throne. He had seen the Ancient of Days. He had seen the Son of Man coming in glory. And he had heard the promise: the kingdom will be given to the saints, and it will last forever. Babylon would fall. Persia would fall. Greece would fall. Rome would fall. Every empire built by human hands, no matter how powerful, no matter how glorious, would crumble into dust. But the kingdom of God, that kingdom would never end. Daniel lay down that night, his mind still full of the images he had seen. Lions with wings, bears with ribs, leopards with 4 heads, beasts with iron teeth, horns that spoke against heaven, and above it all, a throne of fire, a river of light, and a figure who would reign forever. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough. History was not random. Empires did not rise and fall by chance. Every king, every nation, every moment in time was part of a story that God himself was writing. And the final chapter had already been decided. The beasts would rage, but the kingdom of heaven would overcome. Chapter 6. The Ancient of Days and the Son of Man, the Throne of Heaven. The vision of the 4 beasts left Daniel shaken. For days he carried the weight of what he had seen. The beasts, the horns, the violence, the oppression. But more than anything, it was the final image that stayed with him. The throne, the fire, the Ancient of Days, and the one who came with the clouds of heaven. Daniel could not stop thinking about it. He had seen many things in his long life. He had interpreted dreams, witnessed miracles, and stood before kings. But nothing had prepared him for this. He had looked into the throne room of God himself. In the vision, after the beasts had risen from the sea and wreaked havoc upon the earth, the scene shifted. The chaos gave way to order. The noise fell silent. And Daniel found himself standing before something far greater than any earthly kingdom. Thrones were set in place, not one throne. Many, arranged in a courtroom, as if heaven itself were a place of justice, where every deed would be judged, every word weighed, every hidden thing brought into the light. And then the Ancient of Days took his seat. Daniel had no words to describe what he saw. Human language, even the language of angels, seemed too small to contain it. But he did his best. He wrote it down, so that future generations might glimpse, even faintly, the majesty of the one who sits above all thrones. His clothing was as white as snow, not the white of cloth or marble, but a white so pure, so radiant, that it seemed to glow from within. A white that had never known stain or shadow. A white that spoke of holiness, of purity, of absolute perfection. His hair was white like wool, not the white of age, though he is older than time itself, but the white of eternity, of one who has always been and will always be, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. His throne was flaming with fire, not a fire that consumes, but a fire that purifies, a fire that reveals, the kind of fire that burns away everything false, everything corrupt, leaving only what is true and good and eternal. And the wheels of the throne were all ablaze. They moved, turned, spun with a life of their own, as if the throne itself was alive, responding to the will of the one who sat upon it. The wheels within wheels, burning with eyes, seeing everything, knowing everything, missing nothing. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Not a trickle, not a stream. A river, endless, eternal, pouring forth from the presence of God like the very source of light itself. This was the fire of his holiness, his justice, his unquenchable glory. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Daniel tried to count them, but it was impossible. Angels beyond number. Seraphim, cherubim, archangels, beings of light and power, each one perfect in beauty, each one burning with the love and glory of God. And all of them, every single one, bowed before the throne, not in fear, but in worship, not in servitude, but in adoration. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Daniel saw them, vast scrolls, books that contained every moment of human history, every word spoken, every thought conceived, every act of kindness, every act of cruelty. Nothing was hidden, nothing was forgotten. Everything was written down, waiting for the day when justice would be complete. And then the beasts were judged. Daniel watched as the fourth beast, the one with the boastful horn, met its end. Its body was destroyed and given over to the burning fire. The other beasts had their authority taken away, but they were allowed to live for a season. Their time was finished. Their empires were over. The kingdoms of men had come to an end. But Daniel knew this was not the end of the vision. Something greater was coming. He could feel it. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then he saw him. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. Not a beast, not a monster, not a conqueror on a war horse, but one like a son of man, someone who looked human, someone who had walked the earth, who had known hunger and thirst, who had felt the dust of the road beneath his feet and the weight of sorrow in his heart. But this was no ordinary man. He came with the clouds of heaven, the clouds that had covered Mount Sinai when God gave the law to Moses, the clouds that filled the temple when the glory of the Lord descended, the clouds that belonged to God alone. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. Daniel's heart pounded. This was the moment when heaven and earth would meet, when the eternal plan of God would be revealed, He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. Worshipped him. Not honored, not respected. Worshipped. The kind of worship that belongs to God alone. And the Ancient of Days did not stop them. He gave this authority. He crowned this figure with glory. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Daniel understood. The beasts had their time. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. They rose, they conquered, they fell. But this kingdom, the kingdom of the Son of Man, would never fall. It would outlast every empire, every throne, every power on earth or in heaven. Centuries later, when Jesus of Nazareth stood before the high priest, bound and beaten, the priest would ask him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus would answer with the very words of Daniel's vision, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The priest tore his robes and cried, "Blasphemy!" But it was not blasphemy. It was the truth. The same truth Daniel had seen 600 years earlier. Daniel did not see the cross in this vision. He did not see the nails, the thorns, the blood. But he saw the throne, and he knew that the path from earth to throne, the journey from manger to crown, would be paved with suffering, sacrifice, and love beyond measure. And now, as you lie here tonight, remember this. The same throne Daniel saw still stands. The same Ancient of Days still reigns. And the same promise holds true that one day every power that has ever opposed him will bow. Every empire will crumble, and his kingdom will fill the earth. Daniel lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the vision in his mind. He thought of the fire, the thrones, the books, the river of light, and the face of the Son of Man, radiant with the glory of the Father. He did not know when it would happen. He did not know how, but he knew this. God had already written the ending, and it was good. The kingdoms of this world would become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he would reign forever and ever. Chapter 7. The 70 Weeks Prophecy, Timeline to the Messiah. It was the first year of Darius the Mede, the year after Babylon fell. Daniel was now an old man, his hair white, his body frail. He had lived through 2 empires, served under multiple kings, and witnessed the rise and fall of the greatest city on earth. But his heart had never left Jerusalem. Every day, 3 times a day, he opened the window of his room, faced west toward the holy city, and prayed. He prayed for his people. He prayed for the temple. He prayed for the restoration of Israel. And one day, as he was reading the scrolls of the prophet Jeremiah, he came across a passage that made his heart leap. This is what the Lord says: "When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place." 70 years. Daniel did the calculation. It had been nearly 70 years since the first captives, including himself, had been taken to Babylon. The time was almost complete. The exile was almost over. But as Daniel looked around, he saw no sign of restoration. Jerusalem still lay in ruins. The temple was still a pile of rubble. The people were still scattered. What was God waiting for? And then Daniel understood. The promise would be fulfilled. But not because Israel deserved it. They had sinned. They had turned away from God. They had broken the covenant. If God was going to bring them back, it would not be because of their righteousness. It would be because of his mercy. So Daniel did what he had always done. He prayed, but this was not an ordinary prayer. This was a prayer of confession, of repentance, of desperate pleading. Daniel fell to his knees, covered his head with sackcloth, and poured out his heart before the Lord. "O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with all who love him and obey his commands. We have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. Daniel did not blame others. He did not point fingers. He included himself. We have sinned. We have done wrong. We have rebelled. Lord, you are righteous. But this day we are covered with shame, the men of Judah and people of Jerusalem, and all Israel, both near and far, in all the countries where you have scattered us because of our unfaithfulness to you. He confessed the sins of his people, not just the recent ones, but the sins of generations, the idolatry, the injustice, the pride, the refusal to listen when God sent prophet after prophet, warning them, pleading with them to turn back. O Lord, we and our kings, our princes, and our fathers are covered with shame because we have sinned against you. The Lord our God is merciful and forgiving, even though we have rebelled against him. We have not obeyed the Lord our God or kept the laws he gave us through his servants, the prophets. And then Daniel's voice grew more urgent. He was not just confessing, he was interceding. He was standing in the gap between a holy God and a sinful people, asking for mercy. Now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and who made for yourself a name that endures to this day, we have sinned, we have done wrong. O Lord, in keeping with all your righteous acts, turn away your anger and your wrath from Jerusalem, your city, your holy hill. Our sins and the iniquities of our fathers have made Jerusalem and your people an object of scorn to all those around us. He was appealing to God's name, to his reputation. Lord, if Jerusalem remains in ruins, if your people remain scattered, the nations will mock you. They will say, you are not powerful enough to save. They will say, you have abandoned your covenant. But you have not. You are faithful. You are merciful. So please, for your name's sake, restore us. Now, our God, hear the prayers and petitions of your servant. For your sake, O Lord, look with favor on your desolate sanctuary. Give ear, O God, and hear. Open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. We do not make requests of you because we are righteous, but because of your great mercy. And then, with tears streaming down his face, Daniel cried out the most desperate words of all. O Lord, listen. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hear and act. For your sake, O my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. It was a prayer that echoed through the heavens. A prayer of brokenness. A prayer of faith. A prayer that moved the heart of God. And while Daniel was still speaking, while he was still in prayer, still confessing his sin and the sin of his people, something happened. The air in the room grew warm. A light appeared, soft at first, then brighter. And from within the light stepped a figure, radiant and powerful, his face shining like the sun. It was the angel Gabriel, the same messenger who had appeared to Daniel before. The same one who would, centuries later, appear to a young virgin in Nazareth and tell her she would bear the Son of God. Gabriel spoke gently. Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. Daniel looked up, his face still wet with tears, his heart still trembling. Gabriel continued, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city. 70 weeks, but not weeks of days, weeks of years. 70 times 7, 490 years. To finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. This was not just about the return from exile. This was about something far greater. This was about the Messiah, the one who would finish transgression, who would put an end to sin, who would atone for wickedness, who would bring in everlasting righteousness. Gabriel gave Daniel the timeline, the exact timeline, a prophecy so precise, so mathematically perfect, that it would point to the very era when the Messiah would appear. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks plus 62 weeks. 69 weeks total. 483 prophetic years. The decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was issued by King Artaxerxes of Persia in the year 457 before Christ. It was recorded in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. The command was clear: go back, rebuild the city, restore the walls. From that moment, the clock started. Now, scholars have used different methods to calculate this timeline. The Jewish prophetic calendar used 360 days per year, not 365. Using this prophetic calendar of 360 days per year, many scholars calculate that 483 prophetic years would bring us to approximately the time of Christ's public ministry in the 1st century. And what happened during that time? Jesus of Nazareth, at the age of 30, was baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptist. The heavens opened. The Spirit of God descended like a dove, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The Anointed One, the Messiah, had appeared. The timeline had brought the world to the very era when salvation would break into history. But Gabriel was not finished. After the 62 weeks, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing. Cut off, a term that means removed, executed. The Messiah would not come to set up an earthly throne. Not yet. He would come to give his life. Gabriel continued, "The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed." This was a prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. In the year 70 after Christ, just 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, the Roman army, led by General Titus, surrounded Jerusalem. They broke through the walls, burned the temple, and left the city in ruins. The sanctuary was destroyed, just as Daniel had foreseen. But there was one more piece to the prophecy. One final week, the 70th week. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. In the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. This final week has been understood in different ways by different scholars. Some believe it refers to the ministry of Christ and the years immediately following. Others believe it points to a future time at the end of the age. But all agree on this: every prophecy God gives will be fulfilled with perfect precision. Daniel sat in silence, his mind reeling. Gabriel had given him more than a prophecy. He had given him a timeline, a roadmap through history, a calendar that spanned centuries, pointing to the exact era when the Messiah would come. From the decree of Artaxerxes in 457 BC through the centuries to the time of Christ's appearance, the math, when understood through the prophetic calendar, pointed to the very generation that would witness the coming of the Savior. This was not guesswork. This was not coincidence. This was the hand of God, writing history before it happened, so that when the Messiah came, the world would know. The prophets had spoken. The timeline had been set. And nothing, not kings, not empires, not all the forces of darkness, could delay it by a single day. Daniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He had asked God to restore Jerusalem, and God had answered. But the answer was bigger than Daniel had imagined. It was not just about rebuilding walls. It was about rebuilding humanity. It was about the coming of the one who would take away the sin of the world. 70 weeks, 490 years. From the decree to restore Jerusalem, through the coming of the Messiah, to the final week when all things would be made new. And Daniel, the faithful servant, the man who had prayed 3 times a day for 70 years, had been chosen to see it, to write it down, to pass it on, so that we, thousands of years later, might read his words and know the truth. The Messiah came. Not by accident, but according to the timeline God revealed to Daniel. And he will come again, at the appointed time, on the exact day, in the fullness of time, because the God who spoke to Daniel is the God who keeps his promises, and his word never fails. Chapter 8. The Ram and the Goat, Persia versus Greece. 2 years after the vision of the 4 beasts, in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, Daniel received another vision. This one was different, more specific, more detailed. If the vision of the 4 beasts had shown him the broad sweep of history, this vision would zoom in on 2 particular empires and reveal the conflict between them with startling precision. Daniel found himself standing beside a canal, the Ulai Canal, in the citadel of Susa. The water flowed quietly beside him. The sky above was clear, and then, as he looked up, the vision began. He saw a ram standing beside the canal. It had 2 horns, both of them long, but one horn was longer than the other, and it grew up later than the first. The ram was powerful, charging in every direction, west, north, and south. No animal could stand against it. No one could rescue anything from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. Daniel watched carefully. He knew he was seeing something important. The ram moved with confidence, dominating everything in its path. It was unstoppable. And then, from the west, another creature appeared. A goat came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It moved with incredible speed, as if flying, and between its eyes was a prominent horn, large and powerful. The goat charged toward the ram with great rage. Daniel could feel the fury radiating from it. This was not just a battle. This was personal. This was conquest driven by ambition and pride. The goat struck the ram with savage force, shattering both of its horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled it, and there was no one to rescue the ram from the goat's power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, its large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up, pointing toward the 4 winds of heaven. Daniel stared at the scene, his heart pounding. What did this mean? Who were these animals? What kingdoms did they represent? But the vision was not finished. Out of one of the 4 horns came another horn, which started small but grew in power toward the south and the east, and toward the beautiful land Israel. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens. It threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was brought low. This horn was different. It was not just conquering territory. It was attacking heaven itself. It was defiling the temple. It was stopping the worship of God. Daniel watched in horror as the horn cast truth to the ground. It prospered in everything it did. Then he heard a Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled, the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host that will be trampled underfoot?" The answer came, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." Daniel was trying to understand what he was seeing when suddenly, standing before him was one who looked like a man. And he heard a human voice calling from between the banks of the Ulai, "Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision." Gabriel, the same angel who had brought the prophecy of the 70 weeks, the same messenger of God who stood in the presence of the Almighty. Gabriel approached Daniel, and as he came near, Daniel was terrified. He fell face down on the ground. But Gabriel said to him, "Understand, Son of Man, that the vision concerns the time of the end." While he was speaking to Daniel, Daniel fell into a deep sleep, his face to the ground. But Gabriel touched him and raised him to his feet. "I am going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath," Gabriel said, "because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end." Then Gabriel explained the vision, piece by piece, with perfect clarity. "The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of the Medes and Persians." Daniel understood immediately. The Medo-Persian Empire, the bear from his earlier vision, the chest and arms of silver from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. The ram with two horns, one longer than the other, represented the dual nature of the empire. The Medes came first, but the Persians grew stronger and took the dominant role. Together, they conquered Babylon and ruled over a vast territory stretching from India to Ethiopia. "The shaggy goat is the king of Greece," Gabriel continued, "and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. The goat, Greece, and the prominent horn was Alexander the Great." Daniel's heart raced. This was history written in advance. Alexander the Great, born in the year 356 before Christ, would rise to power in his early 20s. He would lead his armies across the known world with breathtaking speed, moving so fast that it seemed he flew across the earth without touching the ground. In just over 10 years, he would conquer the Persian Empire, Egypt, and lands as far east as India. The ram, Persia, would be utterly destroyed, its two horns shattered, its power trampled into the dust. But Gabriel was not finished. The four horns that replaced the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation but will not have the same power. Alexander the Great passed away suddenly at the age of 32 in the year 323 before Christ. His empire, the largest the world had ever seen, was divided among his four generals. Cassander took Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus took Thrace and Asia Minor. Seleucus took Syria and the eastern territories. Ptolemy took Egypt. Four horns, pointing toward the four winds of heaven, exactly as the vision had shown. And then Gabriel came to the most troubling part of the vision. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the mighty men and the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. This was the little horn, the one who would rise from one of the four divisions of Alexander's empire and wage war against the people of God. And history records exactly who this was. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the 8th ruler of the Seleucid Empire, one of the four kingdoms that came from Alexander's divided empire. He reigned from 175 BC to 164 BC, and he did exactly what the prophecy said he would do. Antiochus saw himself as a god. He called himself Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He demanded worship. He despised the Jewish people and their worship of the one true God. And in the year 167 BC, he did the unthinkable. He marched into Jerusalem with his armies. He entered the temple. He stopped the daily sacrifices. He set up an altar to the Greek god Zeus in the Holy of Holies. And then, to defile the temple completely, he sacrificed a pig on the altar, an unclean animal, an abomination in the eyes of God. He banned the practice of the Jewish faith. He ordered the Jewish people to eat pork, to bow before idols, to abandon the law of Moses. Anyone who refused faced severe consequences. For 2,300 days, roughly 6.5 years, the temple remained defiled. The sacrifices stopped. The worship of God was outlawed. But Antiochus did not know that he was fulfilling a prophecy written 400 years earlier. He thought he was acting on his own. He thought he was conquering in his own strength. But he was nothing more than a piece in the hands of a God who sees the end from the beginning. And just as the prophecy said, Antiochus Epiphanes met his end. Not by human power, but by illness. In the year 164 BC, he fell gravely ill while retreating from a failed campaign in Persia. He passed away far from home, despised even by his own people. And when he was gone, the Jewish people, led by a family known as the Maccabees, rose up in revolt. They reclaimed the temple. They cleansed it. They rededicated it to the Lord. And the sacrifices began again. This event is still remembered today. The Jewish people celebrate it every year during the festival of Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication. It is a celebration of the faithfulness of God, who kept his people even in their darkest hour. Daniel stood in awe. The vision had shown him not just empires, but individuals. Not just broad strokes of history, but specific events, specific years, specific acts of rebellion and redemption. The ram and the goat. Persia and Greece, Alexander and Antiochus. All of it written down centuries before it happened. All of it fulfilled with perfect precision. Gabriel looked at Daniel and said, "The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future." Daniel was exhausted, overwhelmed. The weight of what he had seen pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He fell ill for several days. When he finally recovered, he went about the king's business, but his heart was troubled. He had seen the future. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had seen kings who thought they were gods, brought low by the hand of the Almighty. He had seen the temple defiled and then restored. And he knew, deep in his soul, that this was not just history. It was a pattern, a warning, a glimpse of what would happen again and again throughout time. Many scholars see in Antiochus not only a historical figure, but also a foreshadowing, a pattern of what would come again at the end of the age, when another ruler would set himself against God and his people. But just as Antiochus met his end, so too will every enemy of God be brought low. Not by human hands, but by the breath of the mouth of the Lord. By the appearing of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Daniel sealed the vision, just as Gabriel had instructed. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough. History is not random. Empires do not rise by chance. Kings do not reign by their own power. Every throne, every crown, every kingdom is under the sovereign authority of the God of heaven, and in the end, every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess, and every enemy of God will be brought low. The ram fell, the goat fell, the little horn fell, and one day every power that has ever opposed the Lord will fall as well. Because the kingdom belongs to God, and his reign will never end. Chapter 9. Daniel's Final Vision, Kings of North and South. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was also called Belteshazzar. The message was true, and it concerned a great conflict. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. Daniel was now very old. His hair was white. His body was frail. He had lived longer than most men, seen more than most men, and carried burdens heavier than most men could bear. But his spirit was still strong, his faith was still steady, and his heart was still turned toward Jerusalem. For 3 weeks, Daniel had been mourning. He ate no choice food. No meat or wine touched his lips. He used no lotions. He simply prayed and fasted, seeking understanding from the Lord. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as he was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, he looked up and saw a vision that would change him forever. Before him stood a man dressed in linen, with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Daniel was the only one who saw the vision. The men with him did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. Daniel was left alone, gazing at this great vision. He had no strength left. His face turned deathly pale, and he was helpless. Then he heard the man speak, and as he listened, he fell into a deep sleep, his face to the ground. A hand touched him and set him trembling on his hands and knees. The voice said, "Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you." When he said this, Daniel stood up, trembling. The man continued, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia." Daniel's eyes widened. The angel had been delayed, not by earthly forces, but by a spiritual battle in the heavenly realms. The prince of Persia, a spiritual power assigned to that kingdom, had fought against God's messenger, and it took the archangel Michael, the protector of Israel, to break through. This was a glimpse behind the veil, a revelation that the battles on earth are reflections of battles in heaven, that kingdoms rise and fall not just by the will of men, but by the movements of spiritual powers, both good and evil. The angel said, "Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." And then the angel began to speak. What followed was the most detailed prophecy in all of Scripture. A vision that covered hundreds of years of history, naming kings, describing wars, foretelling alliances and betrayals, all with astonishing precision. The angel spoke of the kings of Persia. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. History records that after Cyrus, there were indeed 3 more kings of Persia, Cambyses, Smerdis, and Darius I. And the 4th was Xerxes I, who launched a massive invasion against Greece in 480 BC, just as the prophecy said. Then the angel spoke of a mighty king who would appear and rule with great power, doing as he pleased. This was Alexander the Great. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised. Again, perfect accuracy. Alexander's empire was divided among his 4 generals, not his children. And none of the 4 kingdoms had the power that Alexander had wielded. And then the vision narrowed its focus. From this point on, the prophecy would concentrate on 2 of the 4 kingdoms, the king of the south and the king of the north. The king of the south was the Ptolemaic dynasty, ruling from Egypt. The king of the north was the Seleucid dynasty, ruling from Syria. And between them lay the land of Israel, caught in the crossfire of their endless wars. The angel described their conflicts in minute detail. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he, and will rule his own kingdom with great power. This was Seleucus I, one of Alexander's generals. He started as a commander under Ptolemy I of Egypt, but then broke away and established his own kingdom in Syria, which became more powerful than Egypt. After some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. This referred to Berenice, daughter of Ptolemy II of Egypt, who was given in marriage to Antiochus II of Syria to seal a peace treaty. But the alliance failed. Berenice and her son met tragic ends, and war broke out again. On and on the prophecy went, describing battle after battle, alliance after alliance, betrayal after betrayal, kings rising and falling, daughters given in marriage for political gain, armies marching back and forth across Israel like a tide that never stopped. And every detail came true. Historians have compared the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 with the historical records of the Greek and Roman historians, Polybius, Livy, Josephus, and the match is so precise that skeptics have argued the book of Daniel must have been written after these events occurred. But it was not. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the caves of Qumran, contain fragments of the book of Daniel dating to the 2nd century before Christ, proving that the prophecy was written long before the events it describes. God had shown Daniel the future, not in vague symbols, but in specific details, specific wars, specific years. And then the prophecy came to the figure Daniel had seen before. The little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes. Then a contemptible person will arise, to whom royal honor has not been given. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Antiochus IV Epiphanes was not the rightful heir to the throne. He took power through manipulation and deceit. And once he had it, he used it to wage war against Egypt, against his rivals, and against the people of God. He will set his mind against the Holy Covenant. He will take action against it and then return to his own country. At the appointed time he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. Antiochus invaded Egypt twice. The first time, he succeeded. The second time, he was stopped by the Romans, who ordered him to leave Egypt immediately. Humiliated and enraged, he turned his fury on Jerusalem. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. This was the same event Daniel had seen in the vision of the ram and the goat. Antiochus stopped the sacrifices, defiled the temple, and set up an altar to Zeus in the Holy of Holies. But the prophecy also spoke of a remnant. The people who know their God will firmly resist him. This was the Maccabean revolt. A family of faithful Jews who refused to bow, who took up arms against the tyrant, who fought not for political power, but for the right to worship the one true God. And after years of struggle, they won. They cleansed the temple. They rededicated it, and they preserved the faith for future generations. But then the angel's voice grew more somber. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. This part of the prophecy points beyond the historical Antiochus to a time still future. Many scholars believe this describes events that will unfold at the end of the age, when another conflict will arise involving the land of Israel. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. The beautiful holy mountain, Jerusalem, the final enemy will make his stand there. But he will fall, not by human hands, but by the return of the King of Kings. Daniel listened to every word, his heart heavy. The angel had shown him centuries of war, suffering, and oppression. He had seen kingdoms rise and fall. He had seen the faithful persecuted. He had seen the temple defiled. But he had also seen something else. He had seen that God was in control. That every king, every battle, every moment of history was part of a plan. That nothing happened by chance. That even in the darkest times, God's people were never abandoned. The angel finished speaking, and Daniel, overwhelmed, fell to the ground once more. But the angel touched him again and said, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." Daniel did not fully understand everything he had seen, but he trusted, he believed, and he wrote it all down, so that future generations might read and know that the God of heaven sees all, knows all, and controls all. From Persia to Greece, from Alexander to Antiochus, from the Maccabees to the end of time, every step of the journey had been revealed. And one day, when the final battle comes, when the last enemy rises, when the world trembles in fear, the faithful will remember Daniel's words, and they will stand firm, because they know their God, and their God will never fail. Chapter 10. The End Times, Resurrection and Judgment. After the vision of the kings of the north and south, after seeing centuries of war and suffering unfold before his eyes, Daniel stood trembling. His body was weak. His heart was heavy. He had seen so much. Too much for one man to carry. But the angel was not finished. At that time, the angel said, his voice filled with both warning and hope, "Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. A time of distress, the greatest tribulation the world has ever known, darker than the fall of Jerusalem, more intense than the persecution under Antiochus, more challenging than any period that has ever come upon the earth. This was the final chapter of human history. The last battle, the end of the age. But the angel's voice grew softer, filled with promise. But at that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. The book of life, the same book Daniel had seen in his vision of the Ancient of Days, when the court was seated and the books were opened. Every name written there would be saved, not because of their goodness, not because of their strength, but because of the mercy of God, who inscribed their names before the foundation of the world. And then the angel said something that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Resurrection. The dead would rise, not just spiritually, but physically. Bodies that had been buried for centuries, returned to dust, scattered by wind and time, would be restored. Souls that had long departed would return, and every person who had ever lived would stand before the throne of God, some to everlasting life, to dwell in the presence of God forever, where there is no more pain, no more tears, no more death, where the light never fades and the joy never ends, where the righteous will shine like the brightness of the heavens, like stars forever and ever. Others to shame and everlasting contempt, to face the judgment they had spent their lives avoiding, to stand before the holy God they had mocked, ignored, or denied. Daniel had seen this before, in fragments, in glimpses, but now it was clear. Death was not the end. The grave was not the final word. Every human being would rise, and every human being would be judged. The angel looked at Daniel with compassion. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. The wise, not those who accumulated knowledge, not those who built empires or wrote books or won battles, but those who knew God, those who walked in his ways, those who turned from darkness to light and led others to do the same. They would shine, not for a moment, but forever. Like stars in the night sky, they would burn with the glory of God, guiding others, illuminating the darkness, reflecting the light of the one who had saved them. But then the angel gave Daniel a command. "But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Seal the scroll, not because it was secret, not because it was forbidden, but because it was not yet time. The prophecies would remain a mystery until the appointed hour. And when that hour came, when the end drew near, people would search. They would study. They would go back to the ancient words and finally understand what Daniel had written. And in those days, knowledge would increase, Not just spiritual knowledge, but knowledge of all kinds. Technology, science, information spreading faster than ever before. The world would change at a speed no previous generation had witnessed. Daniel looked up and saw two other angels standing on opposite banks of the river. One of them asked the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" The man raised both hands toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever, saying, "It will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. Time, times, and half a time. 3.5 years. The same period mentioned in the book of Revelation. The same duration given for the final time of testing. 42 months. 1,260 days. The final countdown before the return of the king. Daniel heard all this, but he did not understand. So he asked, "My Lord, what will the outcome of all this be?" The angel replied, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand." It was a difficult answer. The wicked would not change. They would continue in their rebellion, blind to the truth, deaf to the warnings. But the righteous would be refined, tested, purified like gold in the fire. And through it all, they would grow in understanding, in faith, in the knowledge of God. Then the angel gave one final word. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Numbers. Specific days. A timeline that Daniel did not fully understand, but that God had numbered with perfect precision. Every day counted. Every moment measured, nothing left to chance. And then the angel spoke his final words to Daniel. Words of comfort, words of rest. "As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Go your way, Daniel. Your work is done. You have been faithful. You have prayed. You have fasted. You have served kings and interpreted dreams. You have stood firm when others bowed. You have kept the faith when the world forgot. Now rest. Close your eyes. Let your weary body return to the dust. Because this is not the end. At the end of the days, you will rise. You will wake. You will stand before the throne of God. And you will receive the inheritance that has been waiting for you since before the foundation of the world." Daniel fell silent. The vision faded. The angel departed. And Daniel was left alone, standing by the river, the words still echoing in his heart. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough. God was in control. History was moving toward a conclusion. And no matter how dark the days became, no matter how fierce the trials, no matter how long the wait, the end was secure. The righteous would rise, the wicked would be judged, and the kingdom of God would stand forever. Daniel returned to his home. He continued to serve faithfully until the end of his days. And when his time came, when his breath grew faint and his eyes closed for the last time, he did not fear. Because he knew one day he would wake. One day he would rise. One day he would see the face of the God he had served all his life. And on that day, every prophecy would be fulfilled. Every promise would be kept, and every tear would be wiped away. And perhaps tonight, as you rest, you can hold on to the same promise, that this life is not the end. That those who trust in God will rise. That one day you too will stand before the throne, not in fear, but in joy, to receive the inheritance that has always been yours. Chapter 11. The Timeline Fulfilled. From Daniel to Jesus to today. As we come to the end of Daniel's journey, it is time to step back and see the full picture. To look at the timeline he was given and trace it through history, from the courts of Babylon to the cross of Calvary, and from that moment to the world we live in today. Daniel lived in a time of empires. He saw Babylon fall and Persia rise. He was given visions of Greece and Rome. He was shown conflicts that would span centuries and the final judgment at the end of time. But woven through all of it, like a golden thread, was a single promise: the Messiah is coming. Let us walk through the timeline one more time. Let us see how every word Daniel wrote came true. And let us consider what it means for us, here, now, in this moment. The statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream had 4 parts. The head of gold was Babylon, the empire that ruled the world in Daniel's time. Powerful, glorious, but destined to fall. And it did. In the year 539 before Christ, on the very night Belshazzar saw the writing on the wall, Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians. The head of gold was replaced by the chest and arms of silver. The second kingdom, just as Daniel had prophesied. The Medo-Persian Empire lasted for over 200 years. It stretched from India to Ethiopia, ruling with strength and determination. But it too was destined to fall. In the year 333 before Christ, Alexander the Great, the young king of Macedonia, led his armies across the known world. He moved with the speed of the wind, conquering Persia, Egypt, and lands all the way to India. The belly and thighs of bronze. The third kingdom, the leopard with 4 wings, just as Daniel had seen. But Alexander passed away young, at the age of 32. And his empire was divided among his 4 generals. The 4 heads of the leopard, the 4 horns of the goat. History unfolding exactly as the vision had shown. And then came Rome. The legs of iron, the beast with iron teeth. The empire that crushed and trampled everything in its path. Rome built roads, established laws, and brought order to the world. But it did so with force, with crucifixions, with the might of those who dared to resist. And it was into this world, under the rule of Rome, that the Messiah came. Remember the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Gabriel told Daniel that from the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the Messiah, there would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 69 weeks total. 483 prophetic years. The decree was issued in the year 457 before Christ. Using the prophetic calendar of 360 days per year, many scholars calculate that this timeline brings us to the very era when Jesus of Nazareth appeared in history. And in that era, Jesus of Nazareth, at the age of 30, was baptized in the Jordan River. The heavens opened. The Spirit descended like a dove. And the voice of the Father declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The Anointed One had come. The Messiah, the Son of Man, the one Daniel had seen coming with the clouds of heaven, approaching the Ancient of Days, receiving authority and glory and an everlasting kingdom. For 3.5 years, Jesus walked the dusty roads of Israel. He healed the sick. He opened the eyes of the blind. He raised the dead. He taught with authority, speaking words that pierced the heart and awakened the soul. He fulfilled prophecy after prophecy, miracle after miracle. And then, in the year 30 after Christ, he was arrested, betrayed, beaten, mocked, and nailed to a Roman cross. After the 62 weeks, Gabriel had said, "The Anointed One will be cut off." Cut off. Removed. Just as the prophecy foretold. But that was not the end. 3 days later, the tomb was empty. The stone was rolled away. The grave clothes were left behind. And Jesus, the Son of God, rose from the dead. Death could not hold him. The grave could not keep him. because he was not just a man. He was the eternal Son, the one who had existed before Abraham, before Moses, before the foundation of the world, the one who spoke, and light came into being, the one who breathed, and stars filled the sky. He rose, and in rising, he defeated death. He conquered sin. He opened the way for all who believe to pass from darkness into light, from death into life, from judgment into grace. 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus stood on the Mount of Olives with his disciples. He lifted his hands to bless them, and then, before their very eyes, he was taken up into heaven. A cloud received him, and he disappeared from their sight. The disciples stood staring into the sky, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. And then 2 angels appeared beside them and said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." This same Jesus, the Son of Man, the Messiah, the King, he will come back, not as a baby in a manger, not as a suffering servant, but as the conquering King riding on the clouds of heaven, just as Daniel saw. And when he returns, every prophecy will be fulfilled. Every word Daniel wrote will come to pass. The resurrection will occur. The judgment will be rendered, and the kingdom of God will fill the earth. But what about now? What about this time we live in, this space between the first coming and the second? We live in the age of the feet of iron and clay. The Roman Empire fell, but it divided into many nations, some strong like iron, some fragile like clay. Europe, the Americas, the nations that trace their roots back to Rome, united in some ways, divided in others. Just as the statue showed, we live in a time of increasing knowledge. Just as the angel told Daniel, many will go here and there to increase knowledge. We have seen technology advance faster in the last 100 years than in all of human history combined. We have the internet. We have instant communication across the globe. We have knowledge at our fingertips. And we live in a time marked by both great progress and great turmoil. Wars, rumors of wars, conflicts that seem unending. But we also live in a time of hope, because the same God who kept his promise to send the Messiah the first time will keep his promise to send him again. Daniel did not live to see the first coming. He passed away centuries before Jesus was born. But he believed. He trusted. He wrote down what God showed him, knowing that one day it would all make sense. And it did. Every word came true. The statue crumbled, just as Daniel said it would. The beasts rose and fell. The 70 weeks unfolded with remarkable precision. The Messiah came, gave his life, and rose again, exactly according to God's plan. And now, we wait for the final act, the return of the King, the resurrection of the dead, the judgment of all, the establishment of the kingdom that will never end. We do not know the day or the hour. Jesus himself said that no one knows except the Father. But we know the signs. We know the season. And we know that with each passing day, we are one day closer to the moment when the trumpet will sound, the sky will open, and the Son of Man will appear in glory. So what do we do while we wait? We live as Daniel lived. We pray. We remain faithful. We do not bow to the idols of this world. We do not compromise our faith for comfort or safety. We stand firm even when the fire is hot, even when the lions roar, even when the writing is on the wall. We remember that this world is not our home, that empires rise and fall, but the kingdom of God endures forever. That kings come and go, but the King of Kings reigns eternally. And we hold fast to the promise that one day, just as Daniel was told, we will rise. We will wake from sleep. We will stand before the throne. And we will receive the inheritance that has been waiting for us since before time began. Daniel's story is not just history. It is a roadmap. It is a testimony. It is proof that God keeps his word. He said Babylon would fall. It fell. He said Persia would rise. It rose. He said Greece would conquer. It conquered. He said Rome would crush. It crushed. He said the Messiah would come. He came. And he said the Messiah would come again. And he will. Every prophecy fulfilled. Every promise kept. Every word proven true. So tonight, as you close your eyes, as you let the weight of the day fall away, remember this. You are living in the timeline Daniel saw. You are part of the story he wrote. And the God who spoke to him is the same God who watches over you. He has numbered your days. He has written your name. And he has promised that if you trust in him, if you call upon the name of his Son, you will not be forgotten. One day, the last trumpet will sound. One day, the sky will open. One day, the King will return. And on that day, every prophecy will be complete. Every tear will be wiped away. And every soul that belongs to him will shine like the stars forever and ever. Until then, rest in his promises. Walk in his light, and hold fast to the hope that cannot be shaken. Because the God of Daniel is still on the throne, and his word will never fail.
And so, Daniel's visions come to a close. But the story they tell is not over. You have walked with a young captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. You have seen him stand before kings, interpret dreams, and remain faithful through every trial. You have watched empires rise and fall, exactly as God said they would. You have seen the timeline unfold, from the decree of Artaxerxes to the coming of Jesus Christ, through the prophetic calendar, to the very era when salvation entered the world. You have seen prophecy become history, and history become a testimony to the faithfulness of God. And now, as the night grows deep and the world around you falls silent, let these truths settle into your heart. The same God who kept his promise to Daniel keeps his promise to you. The same God who numbered the years until the Messiah came has numbered every breath you take. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead will raise you too, when the final trumpet sounds. So rest tonight, not in fear, but in the certainty that you are held by the one who holds all things. Close your eyes. Let your body relax. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a quiet sky. And know this, you are loved. You are seen. You are not forgotten. The God of heaven watches over you, even now. And when the morning comes, his mercies will be new. Sleep well, beloved. The King is coming. And until he does, his peace is with you. Good night.